In the bustling heart of New York City, where dreams soared as high as the skyscrapers, lived Sophia Martinez, a young woman whose heart was as pure as her origins were humble. With her long, raven hair and eyes that sparkled like stars on a clear night, Sophia possessed a beauty that was only outmatched by her kindness. She had grown up in the Bronx, raised by her hardworking single mother, Elena, who had instilled in her daughter the values of honesty, perseverance, and compassion. Sophia's life took an unexpected turn when she met Jackson Blackwood, the heir to the Blackwood real estate empire. Their eyes locked across a crowded charity gala where Sophia was working as a waitress to make ends meet while pursuing her dream of becoming a teacher. It was as if fate itself had orchestrated their meeting, bringing together two souls from vastly different worlds. Jackson was immediately captivated by Sophia's genuine smile and the way she treated everyone around her with equal respect and warmth. Unlike the socialites he was accustomed to, Sophia's beauty radiated from within, and he found himself drawn to her like a moth to a flame. Their whirlwind romance blossomed over the following months, stealing moments between Jackson's board meetings and Sophia's night classes. They shared walks in Central Park, quiet dinners in hole-in-the-wall restaurants, and dreams of a future together. For Sophia, it felt like a fairy tale come to life, while Jackson discovered a world beyond his privileged upbringing, seeing the city through Sophia's eyes. However, their happiness was not destined to remain unchallenged. As news of their relationship spread through New York's elite circles, whispers and judgmental glances followed Sophia wherever she went. The Blackwood family, led by Jackson's domineering mother, Victoria, and his cunning sister, Penelope, viewed Sophia as nothing more than a gold digger, a common girl who had somehow managed to ensnare their beloved Jackson. Despite the mounting pressure, Jackson stood by Sophia's side, his love unwavering. In a moment that took Sophia's breath away, he proposed to her atop the Empire State Building, slipping a ring worth more than her entire life's savings onto her finger. With tears in her eyes, Sophia said yes, her heart soaring higher than the observation deck they stood upon. But as the news of their engagement broke, the true battle began. Victoria Blackwood, a woman whose icy demeanor could freeze the Hudson River, summoned Sophia to the family's penthouse on the Upper East Side. The invitation was delivered by hand, on thick, cream-colored paper that felt foreign in Sophia's calloused hands. With trepidation in her heart but determination in her step, Sophia entered the lion's den. The Blackwood penthouse was a monument to wealth and taste, with priceless art adorning the walls and furniture that cost more than her mother's entire apartment. Victoria sat perched on an antique chaise lounge, her silver hair swept into an immaculate updo, her eyes sharp as she appraised Sophia. "My dear," Victoria's voice dripped with false sweetness, "I'm sure you understand that this infatuation between you and my son cannot continue. The Blackwood name carries a legacy, a responsibility. Surely, you wouldn't want to be the reason Jackson throws away his birthright?" Sophia's voice trembled but held firm as she replied, "Mrs. Blackwood, I love your son for who he is, not for his name or his money. I would never ask him to choose between me and his family." Victoria's laugh was cold and cruel. "Love? What would someone like you know about love? No, my dear, what you love is the idea of escaping your pitiful existence. Did you really think you could waltz into our world and be accepted? You're nothing more than a passing amusement for Jackson, a rebellious phase he'll outgrow." Each word struck Sophia like a physical blow, but she stood her ground, her mother's teachings echoing in her mind. "I may not have been born into wealth, Mrs. Blackwood, but I was born into a family rich with love and values. Those are things money can't buy." As Sophia turned to leave, her head held high despite the tears threatening to spill, Victoria called out, "If you truly love him, you'll walk away. Save him from making the biggest mistake of his life." The words haunted Sophia as she made her way back to her tiny apartment in the Bronx. The contrast between the two worlds she was straddling had never felt more stark. As she entered the cramped living room, the scent of her mother's cooking enveloped her like a comforting hug. Elena took one look at her daughter's face and knew something was wrong. "Mihija, what happened?" she asked, pulling Sophia into her arms. As Sophia recounted the confrontation with Victoria, Elena's face darkened with anger, but her words were soft. "Mija, true love doesn't see class or money. If Jackson loves you as much as you love him, no force on earth can tear you apart." Buoyed by her mother's unwavering support, Sophia made a decision. She would prove to the Blackwoods and to herself that she was worthy of Jackson's love, not by changing who she was, but by embracing it. She would show them that true wealth lay in kindness, compassion, and integrity. The following weeks were a whirlwind of wedding preparations, with Victoria taking charge and steamrolling over any suggestions Sophia made. The guest list read like a who's who of New York society, with no place for Sophia's friends or family beyond her mother. The venue was switched from the small, intimate garden Sophia had dreamed of to the grandiose Blackwood estate in the Hamptons. Through it all, Jackson seemed oblivious to Sophia's distress, caught up in the excitement and distracted by a sudden influx of work his father had thrust upon him. Sophia found herself increasingly isolated, with even her future sister-in-law, Penelope, treating her with thinly veiled contempt. It was during one of the many fittings for her designer wedding gown that Sophia overheard a conversation that shattered her world. Hidden behind a rack of dresses, she listened as Penelope spoke to someone on the phone. "Everything's going according to plan," Penelope's voice dripped with satisfaction. "The little gold digger has no idea. Once she's humiliated in front of everyone at the wedding, she'll run back to whatever hole she crawled out of, and Jackson will finally see reason." Sophia's heart pounded in her chest as she pieced together the implications. The Blackwoods were planning something, a public humiliation that would drive her away from Jackson forever. Her mind raced, torn between confronting them and fleeing to protect herself from the pain that was sure to come. As she stumbled out of the boutique, the busy New York streets a blur around her, Sophia bumped into someone. Looking up, she found herself face to face with Alexander Hawthorne, Jackson's best friend and the best man for the wedding. Alexander had always been kind to her, one of the few in Jackson's circle who had welcomed her without judgment. "Sophia? Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Alexander's voice was laced with concern. In that moment, overwhelmed by the weight of what she had discovered, Sophia made a split-second decision. She needed an ally, someone who could help her navigate the treacherous waters of high society and uncover the truth behind the Blackwoods' plan. "Alexander," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need your help. I think the Blackwoods are planning to destroy me at the wedding." Alexander's eyes widened in surprise, but there was no disbelief in his expression. Instead, a look of determination settled over his features. "I've always thought something wasn't right about how they've been treating you. Come on, let's go somewhere private and you can tell me everything." As they ducked into a quiet cafe, Sophia felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps with Alexander's help, she could turn the tables on the Blackwoods and prove once and for all that her love for Jackson was pure and true. Little did she know that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of New York's elite society and reveal secrets long buried beneath layers of wealth and deceit. The cafe buzzed with the quiet murmur of conversations and the gentle clink of coffee cups, providing the perfect cover for Sophia and Alexander's clandestine meeting. As Sophia recounted what she had overheard, Alexander's expression grew increasingly troubled. "I've known the Blackwoods for years," he said, running a hand through his sandy hair. "They can be ruthless when it comes to protecting their interests, but this is beyond anything I would have expected." Sophia's hands trembled around her untouched cup of tea. "What should I do, Alexander? If I confront Jackson, will he even believe me over his own family?" Alexander's blue eyes met hers, filled with a mixture of sympathy and determination. "We need evidence, Sophia. Without proof, it's your word against theirs, and in their world, I'm nothing." Sophia finished bitterly. No, Alexander said firmly, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. You're everything that's good and genuine in a world that's often fake and superficial. That's why they fear you. But we're going to use that fear against them. Over the next hour, they hatched a plan. Alexander would use his position as Jackson's best friend to keep an eye on the Blackwoods, while Sophia would continue to play the part of the naive bride-to-be. They would gather evidence of the family's plot and, if necessary, set a trap of their own. As they parted ways outside the cafe, Alexander pulled Sophia into a quick, comforting hug. Stay strong, Sophia. Remember, you're not alone in this anymore. Those words echoed in Sophia's mind as she made her way back to the Bronx. The familiar sights and sounds of her neighborhood washed over her, grounding her in the reality of who she was and where she came from. She may have fallen in love with a man from another world, but she would never be ashamed of her roots. Entering her family's small apartment, Sophia was greeted by the sight of her mother surrounded by piles of fabric and sewing supplies. Elena looked up, her face lighting up at the sight of her daughter. Mija! Come, come! I've been working on a surprise for you, Elena said excitedly, pulling Sophia towards the kitchen table. Spread out before her was a beautiful hand-embroidered veil, delicate flowers, and intricate patterns woven into the gossamer-thin fabric. Sophia's eyes filled with tears as she ran her fingers over her mother's handiwork. Mama, it's beautiful, she whispered. Elena beamed with pride. I wanted you to have something from home, something made with love, to wear on your special day. In that moment, looking at the love manifest in every stitch of the veil, Sophia felt a renewed sense of purpose. She may not have the Blackwoods' money or social standing, but she had something far more valuable, a legacy of love, hard work, and integrity. Gracias, Mama, Sophia said, hugging her mother tightly. This means more to me than any designer dress ever could. As the days passed, Sophia threw herself into wedding preparations with newfound enthusiasm, all while keeping a watchful eye for any signs of the Blackwoods' plot. She attended fittings, tastings, and planning meetings with a smile on her face, never letting on that she knew of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Jackson, caught up in work and family obligations, was often absent, leaving Sophia to face Victoria and Penelope's thinly veiled barbs alone. But where once their words would have cut deep, Sophia now found strength in the knowledge that she was fighting not just for her love, but for the truth. It was during one of these planning sessions, held in the opulent Blackwood mansion, that Sophia's patience and acting skills were put to the test. Victoria was holding court in the drawing room, dictating every aspect of the wedding to an army of planners and designers. The menu simply won't do, Victoria sniffed, waving a manicured hand dismissively. We can't have anything too ethnic. Heaven forbid we offend our guests' delicate palates. Sophia bit her tongue, knowing that the ethnic dishes Victoria was referring to were beloved family recipes she had hoped to include as a nod to her heritage. Penelope, lounging on a chaise with a glass of champagne in hand, smirked. Oh, come now, mother. I'm sure Sophia's people would be thrilled to have their quaint little dishes served alongside proper cuisine. It would be like a cultural exchange, wouldn't it, Sophia dear? Sophia forced a smile, even as she seethed inwardly. I'm sure whatever you decide will be lovely, Penelope. After all, you have so much more experience with these sorts of events than I do. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly at Sophia's measured response, clearly having expected, perhaps even hoped for, a more emotional reaction. Well, isn't that sweet of you to say, Sophia? I'm glad you're finally learning your place in all of this. As the meeting dragged on, Sophia excused herself to use the restroom, needing a moment to collect herself. As she walked down the hallway, she heard hushed voices coming from behind a partially closed door. Recognizing Penelope's voice, Sophia slowed her steps, her heart racing as she strained to listen. Everything's in place, Penelope was saying. The documents have been forged perfectly. Once they're discovered at the wedding, there won't be a soul in attendance who won't believe that our little Cinderella is nothing more than a cunning gold digger." A man's voice, unfamiliar to Sophia, replied, "And you're sure this won't trace back to us? The last thing we need is a scandal." Penelope's laugh was cold and cruel. "Please, darling. By the time we're done with her, Sophia will be lucky if she can show her face in the city again, let alone try to defend herself." Sophia's blood ran cold as she hurried back to the drawing room, her mind reeling from what she had overheard. She needed to tell Alexander immediately. As she re-entered the room, she nearly collided with Jackson, who had finally arrived at the mansion. "Whoa there, beautiful," Jackson said with a laugh, steadying her. "Where's the fire?" Looking up into his warm brown eyes, Sophia felt a pang of doubt. How could the man she loved be so blind to his family's machinations? But as Victoria called out, her voice syrupy sweet, "Jackson, darling. Come tell us what you think about the floral arrangements." Sophia saw a flicker of something, resignation? Frustration? Cross Jackson's face before he turned to his mother with a practiced smile. In that moment, Sophia realized that perhaps Jackson was as much a victim of his family's manipulations as she was. The thought strengthened her resolve. She would uncover the truth, not just for herself, but for Jackson as well. They deserved a chance at real happiness, free from the toxic influence of the Blackwood family's expectations and schemes. As the sun began to set over the New York skyline, casting a golden glow over the city, Sophia slipped away from the mansion. She had a clandestine meeting to arrange with Alexander, and a plan to set in motion. The clock was ticking, with the wedding now just weeks away. Whatever the Blackwoods were planning, Sophia was determined to be ready. Little did she know that the revelations to come would shake the very foundations of the world she had stepped into, and test the strength of her love in ways she could never have imagined. As she hailed a taxi, her mind racing with possibilities and fears, Sophia couldn't help but wonder, in a battle between love and legacy, which would emerge victorious? The streets of New York blurred past the taxi window as Sophia made her way to meet Alexander. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, fear, determination, and a fierce desire to protect not only herself but also Jackson from the web of deceit his family had woven. The taxi pulled up to a small, unassuming cafe in a quiet corner of the city, far from the prying eyes of the Blackwood social circle. As Sophia stepped out, she spotted Alexander waiting for her, his usually carefree expression replaced by one of concern and concentration. "Sophia," he greeted her, pulling her into a quick hug. "Are you okay? You sounded urgent on the phone." She shook her head, fighting back tears. "I overheard Penelope, Alexander. They're planning something big for the wedding day. Something that will destroy me in front of everyone." Alexander's jaw clenched as he ushered her inside the cafe. They found a secluded booth in the back, and once they were settled with steaming cups of coffee, Sophia recounted everything she had overheard at the Blackwood mansion. "Forged documents?" Alexander mused, his brow furrowed. "That's a serious accusation, Sophia. If we're going to counter this, we need hard evidence." Sophia nodded, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. "I know. But how? They're always one step ahead of us." Alexander leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "Not always. Remember, I've known this family for years. I know their weaknesses, their hiding spots. If there's evidence to be found, I'll find it." As they discussed their plan of action, Sophia felt a glimmer of hope. With Alexander on her side, perhaps she stood a chance against the Blackwoods' machinations. "There's something else," Sophia said hesitantly. I think Jackson might be trapped in all of this too. You should have seen his face when Victoria called him over today. It was like he was putting on a mask. Alexander nodded slowly. I've suspected as much for a while now. Jackson's always been under immense pressure to be the perfect Blackwood heir. Your relationship, it's the first time I've seen him truly happy in years. Sophia's heart swelled with a mixture of love and determination. Then we're not just fighting for me. We're fighting for Jackson too. For our chance at real happiness. As they parted ways, each with their own mission, Sophia felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would face whatever challenges lay ahead, not just for herself, but for the man she loved. The following days were a blur of wedding preparations and clandestine investigations. Sophia played her part to perfection, smiling and nodding at Victoria's increasingly outrageous demands while secretly meeting with Alexander to piece together the puzzle of the Blackwoods' plot. It was during one of these secret meetings that Alexander made a breakthrough. He arrived at their usual cafe, his face flushed with excitement and a file folder clutched tightly in his hand. I found something, he said breathlessly as he slid into the booth across from Sophia. It took some doing, but I managed to get access to Penelope's private office. Sophia's eyes widened. Alexander! That's so dangerous. If they had caught you. He waved off her concern. It was worth the risk. Look at this. He opened the folder and spread out several documents. Sophia leaned forward, her heart racing as she scanned the papers. There were bank statements, emails, and what looked like drafts of the forged documents Penelope had mentioned. They're planning to make it look like you've been embezzling money from the Blackwood Foundation, Alexander explained, his voice tight with anger. These drafts show transfers from the foundation's accounts to a shell company they've set up in your name. Sophia felt the blood drain from her face. But I've never. I wouldn't. Alexander reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I know, Sophia. And we're going to prove it. But there's more. He pulled out another set of documents, these ones older and slightly yellowed with age. I found these hidden in a false bottom of Penelope's desk. They're letters between Victoria and someone named Maria Elena Gonzalez. Sophia gasped. That's my grandmother's name. But how? Alexander's eyes met hers, filled with a mix of sympathy and determination. Sophia, I think there's a lot more to this story than any of us realized. These letters, they suggest that Victoria and your grandmother knew each other. And not just casually. They were close. As Sophia read through the letters, her hands shaking, she felt as though the ground was shifting beneath her feet. The Victoria in these letters was a far cry from the cold, calculating woman she knew. This Victoria wrote of dreams, of love, and of a deep friendship with Maria Elena. But if they were such good friends, Sophia mused, why would Victoria treat me this way? Why would she be so against my relationship with Jackson? Alexander shook his head. I don't know. But I think finding the answer to that question might be the key to unraveling this whole mess. As they pored over the documents, piecing together a timeline of events, Sophia's phone buzzed with a text from Jackson. Dinner tonight? Just the two of us. I've missed you. Sophia's heart fluttered. Despite everything, her love for Jackson remained unwavering. She showed the message to Alexander. Go, he urged. We need to keep up appearances. And who knows? Maybe you can find out if Jackson knows anything about all of this. That evening, Sophia found herself at a small, intimate restaurant in the West Village. It was a far cry from the upscale establishments the Blackwoods usually frequented, and Sophia felt a surge of affection for Jackson for choosing it. As they settled into their seats, Sophia couldn't help but notice the tension in Jackson's shoulders, the worry lines creasing his forehead. Jack, she said softly, reaching across the table to take his hand. What's wrong? He sighed, squeezing her hand. I'm sorry, sophomore. I've been so caught up in work and this wedding madness. I feel like I've been neglecting you. Sophia's heart ached at the genuine remorse in his voice. It's okay. I know how important your work is to you. Jackson shook his head. No, it's not okay. You're what's important to me, Sophia. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I've been letting my family. He trailed off, a flash of something, anger? Frustration? Crossing his face. Sophia leaned forward, her voice gentle but probing. Your family what, Jack? For a moment, it seemed as though Jackson might open up, might share the burden that was clearly weighing on him. But then, like a shutter coming down, his expression smoothed over. Nothing, he said, forcing a smile. Let's not talk about them tonight. This is about us. As they ate and talked, Sophia felt the familiar warmth of her love for Jackson envelop her. Yet there was an undercurrent of tension, of things left unsaid. She wanted desperately to confide in him, to share what she and Alexander had discovered. But the memory of Penelope's scheming words held her back. As the evening drew to a close, Jackson surprised her by suggesting a walk through nearby Washington Square Park. The night was cool and clear, the arch of the park glowing softly in the lamplight. They strolled hand in hand, and for a moment, Sophia could almost forget the storm that was brewing around them. As they paused beneath the arch, Jackson turned to her, his eyes serious. Sophia, he began, his voice husky with emotion. I know things have been crazy lately. This wedding, my family, it's all so complicated. But I want you to know that no matter what happens, no matter what anyone says or does, I love you. You're the one constant in my life, the one person I can always count on to be real. Tears pricked at Sophia's eyes as she looked up at the man she loved. In that moment, she made a decision. She couldn't keep him in the dark any longer. Jack, she said, taking a deep breath. There's something I need to tell you. Something important. But before she could continue, Jackson's phone rang, shattering the moment. His face fell as he glanced at the screen. It's my father, he said apologetically. I have to take this. As Jackson stepped away to answer the call, Sophia hugged herself against the suddenly chilly night air. She watched him, noting the way his shoulders tensed, the clipped tone of his responses. Whatever Richard Blackwood was saying, it wasn't good news. When Jackson returned, his face was a mask of conflicting emotions. I'm so sorry, sophomore. There's an emergency at the office. I have to go. Sophia nodded, swallowing her disappointment and the words she had been about to share. Of course. Go. We can talk tomorrow. Jackson pulled her into a fierce hug, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I love you, he whispered. Never forget that. As she watched him hurry away, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The wedding was just days away, and the web of secrets and lies surrounding them seemed to be tightening with each passing hour. Back in her small apartment in the Bronx, Sophia found her mother still awake, working on the wedding veil. Elena looked up as Sophia entered, her keen eyes immediately noting her daughter's troubled expression. Mija, she said softly. What's wrong? Sophia collapsed onto the worn sofa beside her mother, finally letting the tears she had been holding back fall. Between sobs, she poured out the whole story, the Blackwoods' plot, Alexander's discoveries, and her fears for her relationship with Jackson. Elena listened in silence, her skilled hands never pausing in their work on the veil. When Sophia finally fell quiet, Elena set aside her needlework and pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace. My brave, beautiful girl, she murmured. You carry so much on your shoulders. But remember this, you come from a long line of strong women. Whatever the Blackwoods throw at you, you can face it. You are not alone. Sophia clung to her mother, drawing strength from her unwavering support. As she calmed, a thought struck her. "Mama," she said, pulling back to look at Elena. "Did you ever hear Abuela mention someone named Victoria? Maybe from when she first came to New York?" Elena's brow furrowed in concentration. "Victoria? I'm not sure. Your grandmother didn't speak much about her early days in the city. But..." She trailed off, her eyes growing distant with memory. "But what, Mama?" Elena shook her head slowly. "It's probably nothing. But I remember, when I was a little girl, finding an old photograph hidden in the back of your grandmother's jewelry box. It was of two young women, arms around each other, laughing. I asked Abuela who they were, and she just said it was her and an old friend. But now that you mention it, I think she might have called the other woman Vicky." Sophia's heart raced. Could it be? Was it possible that her grandmother and Victoria Blackwood had not only known each other but been close friends? "Mama, is there any chance that photograph still exists?" Elena nodded. "I kept all of your grandmother's things after she passed. They're in a box in my closet. We can look through them tomorrow." That night, as Sophia lay in bed, her mind whirled with possibilities. If they could find that photograph, if they could uncover the truth about Victoria and her grandmother's relationship, could it be the key to unraveling the Blackwoods plot? As she drifted off to sleep, Sophia's dreams were a jumble of images: Victoria and her grandmother as young women, Jackson's torn expression, Penelope's scheming smile. Through it all, a single thought persisted: the truth was out there, and she would find it, no matter the cost. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the tumultuous emotions swirling within Sophia. She awoke early, her body humming with nervous energy. Today was the day she and her mother would search for the mysterious photograph, a potential key to unlocking the secrets of the past. As Sophia helped her mother pull out boxes of old mementos from the closet, she couldn't help but feel a sense of reverence. These were the remnants of a life lived, the treasures her grandmother had deemed worthy of keeping through the years. "Here," Elena said, pulling out a battered shoebox. "This is where I kept the most precious things." With trembling hands, Sophia opened the box. Inside was a jumble of items: faded letters, ticket stubs, a delicate lace handkerchief. And there, nestled at the bottom, was a small, yellowed envelope. Sophia's breath caught in her throat as she carefully extracted a black and white photograph. Two young women smiled up at her, their arms around each other, faces alight with laughter. One of them was unmistakably her grandmother, her features softer and unlined by age but still recognizable. And the other. "Dios mío," Elena breathed. "That's her, isn't it? Victoria Blackwood?" Sophia nodded, unable to speak. The woman in the photograph bore little resemblance to the cold, calculating Victoria she knew. This Victoria was radiant, her smile wide and genuine, her eyes sparkling with joy. "They look so happy," Sophia murmured, tracing the outline of the two women with a gentle finger. As she turned the photograph over, her heart leapt. There, in faded ink, was an inscription. "Vicky and Maria Elena, Coney Island, summer 1965. Friends forever." "I don't understand," Sophia said, looking up at her mother. "If they were such good friends, why would Victoria treat us this way now? What happened between them?" Elena shook her head, her expression troubled. "I don't know, Mija. Your grandmother never spoke of this Victoria. Whatever happened, it must have been painful for her to keep it such a secret." As Sophia stared at the photograph, a plan began to form in her mind. She needed to show this to Alexander, to see how it fit with the letters they had found. And then, Then she needed to confront Victoria herself. With a quick kiss to her mother's cheek and a promise to be careful, Sophia rushed out of the apartment, the precious photograph tucked safely in her bag. She texted Alexander as she hurried to the subway, asking to meet at their usual cafe. The city seemed to buzz with anticipation around her, as if it too could sense the impending confrontation. As Sophia emerged from the subway station near the cafe, she nearly collided with a tall figure hurrying in the opposite direction. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I wasn't looking where I was, Jackson." Her fiancé stood before her, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, dark circles under his eyes suggesting a sleepless night. "Sophia! What are you doing in this part of town?" For a moment, Sophia considered telling him everything about the photograph, about his family's plot, about her fears and hopes. But the guarded look in his eyes held her back. "I'm meeting a friend for coffee," she said instead, hating the lie but knowing it was necessary, at least for now. "What about you? Is everything okay? You look exhausted." Jackson ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she knew well. "It's nothing. Just some work stuff. Listen, I can't talk now, but I'll call you later, okay?" Before Sophia could respond, he was gone, swallowed up by the rush of people on the sidewalk. She stood there for a moment, her heart heavy. The distance between them seemed to be growing by the day, and she wondered if they would be able to bridge it before it was too late. Shaking off her melancholy, Sophia continued to the cafe. Alexander was already there, a laptop open in front of him, his face creased with concentration. "Sophia," he greeted her, his eyes lighting up as he saw her. "I think I've found something. But first, tell me what was so urgent." She pulled out the photograph, sliding it across the table to him. Alexander's eyebrows shot up as he examined it. "This is incredible," he murmured. "Do you know what this means?" Sophia shook her head. "I'm not sure. But I think it's time we confront Victoria with this. Whatever happened between her and my grandmother, it might be the key to understanding why she's so against my relationship with Jackson." Alexander nodded, his expression serious. "You're right. But we need to be careful. The Blackwoods are powerful, and they won't take kindly to having their secrets exposed." He turned his laptop around, showing Sophia a series of documents on the screen. "I've been doing some digging into the Blackwood family history. There's something strange about the time period when this photo was taken. It seems Victoria disappeared from the social scene for almost a year in 1965. When she came back, she was engaged to Richard Blackwood." Sophia leaned forward, her mind racing. "So whatever happened between her and my grandmother, it must have been during that time." "Exactly," Alexander said. "And I think I might have found a clue about what it was." He pulled up an old newspaper article, the headline faded but still legible, "Blackwood heiress returns after mystery absence." As Sophia read through the article, her eyes widened. It says here that Victoria claimed to have been traveling in Europe, but there were rumors. Rumors that she had been sent away to deal with a delicate situation, Alexander finished. "Sophia, I think Victoria might have been pregnant." The implications of this revelation hit Sophia like a thunderbolt. Could it be possible? Could Victoria Blackwood, the paragon of New York high society, have had a secret child? "But what does this have to do with my grandmother?" Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander's eyes met hers, filled with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "I'm not sure yet. But I think it's time we found out. We need to confront Victoria, and we need to do it soon. The wedding is in 3 days, and if we're going to stop whatever they're planning, we need to act now." Sophia nodded, her resolve strengthening. "You're right. But first, I need to talk to Jackson. He deserves to know what's going on before we do this." As she left the cafe, Sophia's mind was whirling with possibilities. The weight of the photograph in her bag seemed to grow heavier with each step. It held the key to unraveling a mystery decades in the making, and possibly the power to change the course of her future with Jackson. She pulled out her phone, her heart pounding as she dialed Jackson's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. Sophia sighed, leaving a message asking him to meet her at their favorite spot in Central Park as soon as possible. As she made her way to the park, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced over her shoulder more than once, but the bustling New York streets revealed nothing out of the ordinary. Still, a sense of unease settled over her like a heavy cloak. The sun was beginning to set as Sophia arrived at the Bethesda fountain, casting a golden glow over the water. She and Jackson had spent countless hours here, talking, laughing, dreaming of their future together. Now, as she waited for him, Sophia wondered if those dreams would ever come to fruition. An hour passed, then 2. The park began to empty as night fell, but still, Jackson didn't appear. Sophia checked her phone repeatedly, but there were no missed calls, no messages explaining his absence. Just as she was about to give up and head home, a figure emerged from the shadows. For a moment, Sophia's heart leapt, thinking it was Jackson. But as the person drew closer, she realized it was Penelope Blackwood. Well, Penelope drawled, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Waiting for my brother, are we? I'm afraid he's been detained." Sophia's blood ran cold. "What do you mean? What have you done to him?" Penelope laughed, the sound echoing harshly across the now empty park. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. Jackson's fine. He's just finally seeing sense, that's all. Did you really think he'd choose you over his family? Over his legacy?" Sophia stood her ground even as fear threatened to overwhelm her. "You're lying. Jackson loves me." "He wouldn't." "Wouldn't what?" Penelope interrupted. "Wouldn't realize that marrying some nobody from the Bronx would be the biggest mistake of his life? Wake up, Sophia. You don't belong in our world. You never did." As Penelope spoke, Sophia's hand unconsciously moved to her bag, where the photograph lay hidden. The movement didn't go unnoticed by Penelope, whose eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What's in the bag, Sophia? More evidence of your little gold-digging scheme?" Before Sophia could react, Penelope lunged forward, grabbing the bag. In the ensuing struggle, the contents spilled out onto the ground, including the precious photograph. Time seemed to stand still as both women stared at the image of Victoria and Maria Elena, young and carefree, smiling up at them from the past. Penelope's face drained of color. "Where did you get this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. Sophia snatched the photograph back, clutching it to her chest. "It was my grandmother's. She and your mother were friends once. What happened, Penelope? What tore them apart?" For a moment, Penelope's carefully constructed mask of disdain slipped, revealing a flicker of uncertainty. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a sneer. "It doesn't matter," she spat. "Whatever little fantasy you've concocted about some long-lost connection between our families, it changes nothing. In 3 days, you'll be exposed for the fraud you are, and Jackson will finally be free of you." With that, Penelope turned on her heel and stalked away, leaving Sophia alone in the darkening park, her mind reeling from the encounter. As she made her way home, Sophia's thoughts were a jumble of questions and fears. Where was Jackson? Why hadn't he come to meet her? And what did Penelope mean about him being detained? She tried calling him again, but this time, the call went straight to voicemail. A sense of dread settled in the pit of her stomach. Something was very wrong. Back in her small apartment, Sophia found her mother waiting up for her, worry etched on her face. "Mija," Elena said, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. "I was so worried. Where have you been?" Sophia collapsed onto the couch, the events of the day finally catching up with her. Through tears, she recounted her confrontation with Penelope and Jackson's mysterious absence. Elena listened in silence, her face growing more troubled with each word. When Sophia finished, her mother took her hands, looking her straight in the eye. "Sophia, mi amor, listen to me. Whatever is happening, whatever secrets the Blackwoods are hiding, you must be strong. You come from a line of women who have faced adversity and emerged victorious. Your grandmother, there was always a sadness in her eyes when she spoke of her youth in New York. Now, I think I understand why." Sophia looked at her mother, a sudden realization dawning. "Mama, do you think, could Abuela and Victoria's friendship have ended because of the baby? The one Victoria might have had in secret?" Elena's eyes widened. "Dios mío, it's possible. Your grandmother was a midwife in those days. If Victoria needed help, needed someone she could trust." The pieces were starting to fall into place, forming a picture that was both shocking and heartbreaking. But there were still so many unanswered questions. "I need to talk to Victoria," Sophia said, her voice filled with determination. "Before the wedding. Before it's too late." Elena nodded, squeezing her daughter's hands. "Yes, you do. But not alone. I'm coming with you." Sophia started to protest, but the look in her mother's eyes silenced her. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about uncovering a truth that had been buried for decades, a truth that involved both their families. As they made plans for the confrontation to come, Sophia's phone buzzed with a text. Her heart leapt, hoping it was Jackson, but instead, it was from Alexander. "Emergency. Meet me at the cafe ASAP. I've found something big." Sophia showed the message to her mother. Elena nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Go. Find out what he knows. I'll start making calls to some of your grandmother's old friends. Maybe one of them remembers something about Victoria." With a quick hug and a promise to be careful, Sophia rushed out into the night. The streets of New York seemed different now, charged with the electricity of impending revelation. As she hurried towards the cafe, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the precipice of a discovery that would change everything. The cafe was nearly empty when Sophia arrived, save for Alexander hunched over his laptop in their usual corner booth. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and fear. "Sophia," he said as she slid into the seat across from him. "You're not going to believe what I've found." He turned the laptop around, showing her a series of documents on the screen. Sophia leaned forward, her heart pounding as she read. "These are adoption records," she breathed, looking up at Alexander in shock. He nodded grimly. "From 1965. I had to call in every favor I had to get these unsealed." "Sophia." Victoria Blackwood gave up a baby for adoption that year. A little girl. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as the implications of this revelation sank in. "But that means, if my grandmother was involved, it means there's a possibility that the baby might be related to you," Alexander finished, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophia sat back, her mind reeling. Could it be possible? Could she be related to the Blackwoods? The very family that had treated her with such disdain, that had plotted to humiliate her and drive her away from Jackson? "There's more," Alexander said, scrolling down to another document. I found a record of a substantial payment made by Richard Blackwood to a Maria Elena Gonzalez in 1966. It's listed as a consulting fee, but it could have been hush money, Sophia finished, feeling sick to her stomach. To keep my grandmother quiet about the adoption. Alexander nodded. It's possible. But Sophia, we need to be careful with this information. If it's true, it could destroy the Blackwoods. And if it's not? If it's not, we could be accused of trying to blackmail them, Sophia said, understanding the gravity of the situation. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their discovery hanging heavy between them. Finally, Sophia spoke, her voice filled with resolve. We need to confront Victoria. Tonight. Before the rehearsal dinner tomorrow. This has gone on long enough. Alexander looked at her, concern evident in his eyes. Are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. Sophia nodded, her mind made up. I'm sure. But first, I need to try Jackson one more time. He deserves to know what's happening before we do this. As they left the cafe, the night air cool against their flushed faces, Sophia pulled out her phone. Her hand shook slightly as she dialed Jackson's number, praying that this time, he would answer. To her surprise and relief, he picked up on the second ring. Sophia? His voice sounded strained, tired. Where are you? Are you okay? Jackson, she breathed, relief flooding through her. I've been trying to reach you all day. Where have you been? Are you all right? There was a pause, long enough to make Sophia's heart clench with worry. When Jackson spoke again, his voice was low, almost defeated. I'm at the Blackwood estate in the Hamptons. My father, he insisted I come out here to discuss some last-minute wedding details. Sophia, I think something's wrong. They've been acting strange, having hushed conversations that stop when I enter the room. And Penelope, she keeps giving me these looks, like she knows something I don't. Sophia's mind raced. They had Jackson isolated, away from her and the city. Whatever they were planning, it was happening now. Jack, listen to me, she said urgently. I need you to trust me. Can you get away? Can you meet me? I think so, he said, hesitation clear in his voice. But Sophia, what's going on? You're scaring me. She took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say would change everything. Jackson, I've discovered something about your family. About your mother. It's big, Jack. And I think it might explain why they've been so against our relationship. There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Sophia feared the call had been disconnected. But then Jackson spoke, his voice filled with a determination she hadn't heard in weeks. Tell me where to meet you. I'll be there. They agreed on a rendezvous point halfway between the city and the Hamptons, a small diner just off the highway that would be quiet at this late hour. As Sophia ended the call, she turned to Alexander, who had been listening intently. I need to do this part alone, she said. Jackson needs to hear this from me, without anyone else around. Alexander nodded, understanding in his eyes. Be careful, Sophia. And call me the second you need anything. I'll be ready to move on the Blackwoods as soon as you give the word. As Sophia hailed a taxi to take her to the meeting point, her mind whirled with all that had transpired. The photograph of her grandmother and Victoria, the adoption records, the mysterious payment, it all pointed to a secret that had been buried for decades. A secret that, once revealed, would shake the Blackwood family to its very core. The taxi sped through the night, the lights of the city giving way to the darkness of the highway. Sophia clutched her bag, which contained the photograph and copies of the documents Alexander had uncovered. These pieces of paper held the power to change everything: her relationship with Jackson, her place in the world, and the very foundation of the Blackwood Empire. As the diner came into view, a small oasis of light in the darkness, Sophia's heart began to race. She spotted Jackson's car in the parking lot and felt a mixture of relief and apprehension wash over her. This was it. The moment of truth. She paid the taxi driver and stepped out into the cool night air. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Sophia walked towards the diner, ready to face whatever lay ahead. As she pushed open the door, the bell above it tinkling softly, she saw Jackson sitting in a booth at the far end, his head in his hands. He looked up as she approached, and the mixture of love, fear, and confusion in his eyes nearly broke her heart. "Sophia," he said, standing to embrace her. "What's going on? What's this all about?" She held him tightly for a moment, drawing strength from his presence. Then, pulling back, she looked into his eyes and said the words that would change their lives forever. "Jackson, I think I might be related to your family. And I think your mother has been keeping this secret for a very long time." The diner seemed to fall away as Sophia began to unravel the tale of Victoria Blackwood's hidden past, of a friendship torn apart, and of a child given up in secrecy. As she spoke, laying out the evidence piece by piece, she watched the emotions play across Jackson's face: disbelief, shock, anger, and finally, a dawning understanding. When she finished, silence fell between them, heavy with the weight of revelation. Jackson stared at the photograph of Victoria and Maria Elena, his finger tracing the outlines of the two smiling young women. "I can't believe it," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "All this time, all the lies." Sophia reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "Jackson, I know this is a lot to take in. But we need to confront your mother. We need to know the truth, once and for all." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and fear. "You're right. We'll do it together. Tonight." As they left the diner, hand in hand, Sophia felt a sense of hope blossoming in her chest. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever truths were yet to be uncovered, she and Jackson would face them together. The night air was crisp and invigorating, filled with the promise of revelation and, perhaps, redemption. "We should call Alexander," Sophia said as they approached Jackson's car. "He's been helping me investigate, and he might have more information we can use." Jackson nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Good idea. And I think we should bring your mother, too. If what you've discovered is true, she deserves to be there when we confront my parents." Sophia's heart swelled with love for this man who, even in the face of earth-shattering revelations about his own family, thought of her and her mother's feelings. She squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his unwavering support. As Jackson drove them back towards the city, Sophia made the necessary calls. Alexander agreed to meet them at the Blackwood estate, bringing with him all the evidence they had gathered. Elena, initially hesitant, ultimately agreed to come after hearing the urgency in her daughter's voice. The journey to the Hamptons seemed to pass in a blur of streetlights and quiet conversation. Sophia and Jackson spoke in low voices, piecing together the fragments of the past, trying to make sense of the lies and secrets that had shaped their lives without their knowledge. As they pulled up to the imposing gates of the Blackwood estate, Sophia's phone buzzed with a text from Alexander: "I'm here. Parked down the road. Your mother just arrived too. We're ready when you are." Jackson took a deep breath, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Are you sure about this, Sophia? Once we do this, there's no going back. My family, they might never forgive us." Sophia placed her hand over his, her touch gentle but firm. "We have to do this, Jack. For us, for the truth, and for that little girl who was given up all those years ago. We owe it to her to uncover the truth." He nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "You're right. Let's do this. As they approached the main house, Sophia saw Alexander's car parked discreetly in the shadows of the long driveway. She and Jackson got out, joining Alexander and Elena, who were waiting anxiously by the vehicle. Elena rushed to embrace her daughter, her eyes wide with worry. "Mija, are you sure about this? These people, they're powerful. Dangerous." Sophia hugged her mother tightly. "I'm sure, Mama. We need to know the truth." Alexander stepped forward, a briefcase clutched in his hand. "I've got everything we need here. Bank records, adoption papers, even some old newspaper clippings I managed to dig up. If Victoria tries to deny anything, we've got the evidence to back us up." Jackson, who had been staring up at the looming facade of his childhood home, turned to the group. "Okay. Let's go." The four of them walked up to the front door, each step feeling momentous. Jackson raised his hand to knock, but before he could, the door swung open. Penelope stood there, her face a mask of cold fury. Well, she sneered. "The prodigal son returns. And he's brought the whole circus with him." "Enough, Penelope," Jackson said, his voice firm. "Where are mother and father? We need to speak with them. Now." For a moment, it looked like Penelope might try to stop them, but something in Jackson's expression made her step aside. "They're in the study," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Don't say I didn't warn you." The group made their way through the opulent halls of the Blackwood mansion, their footsteps muffled by plush carpets. Sophia felt as though she were walking through a dream, the lavish surroundings a stark contrast to the turmoil in her heart. As they approached the study, they could hear raised voices from within. Jackson paused, his hand on the doorknob, and looked back at Sophia. She nodded encouragingly, and he pushed the door open. Victoria and Richard Blackwood stood facing each other across the massive mahogany desk, their argument dying on their lips as they turned to see the unexpected intrusion. Victoria's face paled as her eyes swept over the group, lingering on Sophia and Elena. "Jackson?" Richard's voice was a mixture of confusion and anger. "What is the meaning of this?" But it was Victoria who spoke next, her voice barely above a whisper as she stared at Elena. "Maria Elena? No, you must be her daughter. You look just like her." Elena stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "I am Elena Gonzalez, Victoria. And I think it's time you told the truth about what happened between you and my mother all those years ago." The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Victoria seemed to age before their eyes, the weight of decades of secrets visibly pressing down on her shoulders. "I suppose," she said finally, her voice trembling, "that this day was always going to come. Please, all of you, sit down. This is going to take some time." As they settled into the plush leather chairs scattered around the study, Victoria moved to the window, staring out at the manicured grounds bathed in moonlight. When she spoke, her voice was distant, as if she were talking to herself more than to them. "It was the summer of 1965. I was young, carefree, and desperately in love with a man my parents would never have approved of. Maria Elena, your grandmother, Sophia, she was my best friend. The only person I could trust with my secret." Victoria turned back to face the room, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I was pregnant. The father, he was from a working-class family in Brooklyn. My parents would have been horrified. They had already arranged my marriage to Richard, you see. A merger of two great families, they called it." Richard stirred in his chair, his face a mask of shock. "Victoria, what are you saying?" She held up a hand, silencing him. "Please, Richard. Let me finish. I've carried this burden for far too long. Victoria's gaze swept over the room, lingering on each face before settling on Sophia. Maria Elena helped me hide my condition. She found a place where I could go, away from prying eyes. And when the time came, she was there to deliver my baby. A beautiful little girl. Sophia felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. She gripped Jackson's hand tightly, anchoring herself in the storm of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. I wanted to keep her, Victoria continued, her voice breaking. God, how I wanted to. But I knew my parents would never allow it. They would have taken her away, sent her off to some orphanage where I'd never see her again. So Maria Elena, she found a family. A good family, who couldn't have children of their own. They adopted my daughter, gave her a life I couldn't. Elena leaned forward, her voice gentle but insistent. But why the secrecy, Victoria? Why push Sophia away when she and Jackson fell in love? If you regretted giving up your daughter, why not embrace the chance to have her granddaughter in your life? Victoria's laugh was bitter, tinged with decades of regret. Because I was a coward, Elena. Because I looked at Sophia and saw everything I had given up, everything I had lost. It was easier to push her away than to face the truth of what I'd done. Jackson stood abruptly, his face a storm of emotions. So all this time, the way you've treated Sophia, the plots to break us up, it was all because you couldn't face your own past? Jackson, please, Richard interjected, rising to stand beside his wife. Try to understand. Your mother was trying to protect you, to protect our family name. Protect me? Jackson's voice rose in anger. By lying to me my entire life? By trying to destroy my relationship with the woman I love? Sophia stood, placing a calming hand on Jackson's arm. She turned to Victoria, her voice steady despite the tumult of emotions inside her. Mrs. Blackwood. Victoria. I understand why you did what you did back then. But don't you see? This is a chance to make things right. To bring our families together instead of tearing them apart. Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Sophia. You're so much like her, like Maria Elena. She always saw the best in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. Alexander, who had been silent throughout the exchange, cleared his throat. I hate to interrupt, but there's still one question we haven't addressed. The adoption records I found, they might be able to tell us what happened to Victoria's daughter. If you want to know, that is. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Victoria. She stood frozen for a moment, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. With shaking hands, Alexander opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. He scanned the documents inside, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he looked up, his eyes were wide with disbelief. According to these records, he said slowly, the baby was adopted by a couple named Rosa and Miguel Martinez. Sophia felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Martinez? But that's my father's last name. Elena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Dios mío, it can't be. Victoria stepped forward, her eyes locked on Elena. What is it? What do you know? Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. My husband. Sophia's father. He always told me he was adopted. That his birth parents had given him up as a baby. But we never knew. The implications of this revelation crashed over the room like a tidal wave. Sophia felt as though she were drowning, the pieces of her identity shifting and realigning in ways she could never have imagined. Jackson was the first to break the stunned silence. So that means Sophia isn't just related to our family. She's my cousin? Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face. It would appear so. Oh, God, all this time. You were right here, a part of our family, and I pushed you away." Sophia's mind was reeling, but through the chaos of her thoughts, one thing became crystal clear. She turned to Jackson, taking both his hands in hers. "Jack, do you understand what this means?" The baby Victoria gave up. It wasn't a girl. It was a boy. My father. Understanding dawned in Jackson's eyes, followed quickly by a fierce, protective love. He pulled Sophia into a tight embrace, his voice fierce as he addressed the room. "I don't care what this means for succession or the family name. I love Sophia, and I'm going to marry her. She's not going anywhere." Richard, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. "No one is going to stop you, son. It's clear that all of us, have a lot of healing to do. A lot of wrongs to right." Victoria approached Sophia and Elena hesitantly, her usual poise replaced by a vulnerable uncertainty. "Can you ever forgive me? Both of you? I've caused so much pain, so much heartache." Elena was the first to respond, stepping forward to take Victoria's hands in hers. "My mother always taught me that forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves as much as others. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight. But for the sake of our families, for the sake of the love between Sophia and Jackson, yes, I think we can find a way to forgive." Sophia nodded, adding her hands to the intertwined ones of her mother and Victoria. "We're family," she said simply. "All of us. And family stands together, no matter what." As the first light of dawn began to filter through the study windows, the group sat together, talking, crying, and slowly beginning the process of healing decades-old wounds. There was still much to discuss, many details to work out, but for now, it was enough to bask in the glow of truth finally brought to light. 3 days later, as Sophia stood before a mirror in one of the Blackwood mansion's opulent guest rooms, she could hardly believe the turn her life had taken. The wedding was still on, but it had transformed into something far different from the society spectacle Victoria had originally planned. Instead of the lavish affair at the Blackwood estate, Sophia and Jackson had insisted on a smaller, more intimate ceremony in the community garden where they had shared their first kiss. It was a blending of their two worlds, the simple beauty of Sophia's roots combined with the elegance the Blackwoods were accustomed to. As Elena helped her daughter into the wedding gown, a stunning creation that incorporated lace from the veil Elena had painstakingly embroidered, there was a soft knock at the door. To Sophia's surprise, it was Victoria who entered, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said softly. I wanted to give you something." From behind her back, Victoria produced a small, velvet-covered box. Opening it, she revealed a stunning pearl necklace. "This was my grandmother's," she explained. "It's been passed down through the Blackwood women for generations. I want you to have it, Sophia. To welcome you to the family, officially." Tears sprang to Sophia's eyes as Victoria fastened the necklace around her neck. As she looked in the mirror, she saw not just herself, but the legacy of both her families, the strength and love of the Gonzalez women, and now, the history and tradition of the Blackwoods. The ceremony itself was a beautiful blur of emotions. Jackson, looking dashing in his tuxedo, beamed with pride and love as Sophia walked down the aisle on her mother's arm. Richard Blackwood, in a gesture of acceptance and apology, stood with Elena, symbolically giving the bride away together. As they exchanged vows beneath an arbor twined with roses from both the community garden and the Blackwood estate, Sophia and Jackson's words were a promise not just to each other, but to the joining of their families, to healing old wounds and forging a new path forward together. The reception that followed was a joyous celebration of love conquering all obstacles. The Blackwoods' high society friends mingled with Sophia's friends and neighbors from the Bronx, preconceptions and prejudices falling away in the face of good food, music, and the infectious happiness of the newlyweds. As the evening wore on, Sophia found a quiet moment alone with Victoria. The older woman's eyes were soft with emotion as she looked at her new daughter-in-law. "I owe you an apology," Victoria said, her voice thick with regret. "Many apologies, in fact. I was so blinded by my own fears and regrets that I couldn't see the amazing woman you are. Can you ever forgive me for how I treated you?" Sophia took Victoria's hands in hers, her smile gentle and sincere. "Family forgives, Victoria. It won't always be easy, but we have a lifetime ahead of us to build something beautiful from all of this." Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she pulled Sophia into a tight embrace. "Thank you," she whispered, "for loving my grandson so completely, for bringing our family back together, for being the light that showed us all a better way." As they parted, Sophia saw Jackson approaching, his face alight with joy. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his eyes moving between his wife and grandmother. Sophia nodded, leaning into his embrace. "Everything's perfect." And it was. As they rejoined the celebration, surrounded by the love of both their families, Sophia knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. There would be challenges ahead, old habits and hurts to overcome, but together, they would face whatever came their way. The humble girl from the Bronx hadn't just married into the Blackwood family, she had brought them back to their roots, reminding them of the power of love, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds of family. As she danced in her husband's arms, the pearl necklace glinting in the soft light, Sophia knew that her grandmother and Victoria were smiling down on them, their long-ago friendship finally bearing the sweetest of fruits. In the end, it wasn't about wealth or status or even long-buried secrets. It was about two people who loved each other, two families learning to heal and grow together. And as the night wore on, filled with laughter, tears, and new beginnings, Sophia knew that this was just the first page of a beautiful new chapter in all their lives. As the reception drew to a close, Sophia and Jackson stood together, watching their guests, a beautiful blend of two worlds that had once seemed so far apart, mingling and celebrating. Penelope, who had been quiet and subdued throughout the day, approached the couple hesitantly. "Sophia," she began, her usual haughty demeanor replaced by genuine remorse, "I owe you an apology. My behavior, it was inexcusable. I was jealous and afraid of losing my place in the family. But I see now that family isn't about exclusion, it's about growing and embracing new love. Can you ever forgive me?" Sophia, her heart full of the joy and love of the day, smiled warmly at her new sister-in-law. "Of course, Penelope. Family forgives. And I hope we can start fresh, as sisters." Tears glistened in Penelope's eyes as she hugged Sophia tightly. Jackson watched with a mixture of surprise and happiness, seeing his sister let down her walls for perhaps the first time in years. As the last of the guests departed, Sophia and Jackson found themselves alone in the quiet garden. The soft glow of fairy lights illuminated the night, casting a magical spell over the scene of their union. "Well, Mrs. Blackwood," Jackson said, pulling Sophia close, "how does it feel to have turned the world of New York's elite upside down?" Sophia laughed, a sound of pure joy and contentment. "Honestly, it feels pretty amazing. But not as amazing as being your wife." Jackson's eyes softened as he gazed at her. "You know, when I first met you, I thought I was the one sweeping you off your feet. But the truth is, you're the one who saved me, Sophia. You showed me what real love, real family is all about." "We saved each other," Sophia corrected gently. "And now, we have a whole lifetime to build something beautiful together." As they shared a tender kiss under the starlit sky, both Sophia and Jackson knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The humble girl from the Bronx and the heir to the Blackwood fortune had not only found love but had also bridged two worlds, healing old wounds and creating a new legacy of acceptance, forgiveness, and unconditional love. In the years that followed, the Blackwood-Martinez union became a symbol of hope and change in New York society. Sophia and Jackson used their influence and resources to create opportunities for underprivileged youth, honoring both their heritages. Victoria, inspired by her granddaughter-in-law's compassion, established a foundation in Maria Elena's name, dedicated to supporting young single mothers. The family gatherings at the Blackwood estate became legendary, filled with a vibrant mix of cultures, languages, and traditions. Elena's homemade empanadas were served alongside haute cuisine, and salsa music blended seamlessly with classical strings. It was a testament to the power of love to break down barriers and bring people together. And on quiet evenings, when Sophia and Jackson would sit on the porch of their Bronx home, a wedding gift from Victoria, who had bought and restored Elena's entire apartment building, they would look out at the bustling neighborhood and marvel at the journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever regret it?" Sophia asked one such evening, her head resting on Jackson's shoulder. "Giving up the glittering world you grew up in?" Jackson smiled, pulling her closer. "Not for a second. This, right here, is all the glitter I need. You taught me that true wealth isn't in bank accounts or social standings. It's in the love we share, the family we've built, and the lives we've touched." As they sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, the sounds of the city a familiar lullaby around them, Sophia reflected on the incredible turn her life had taken. From a humble girl laughed at by her fiancé's family to a beacon of change and unity, she had remained true to herself and her roots. In doing so, she had not only found her happily ever after but had also helped an entire family rediscover the true meaning of love, acceptance, and the unbreakable bonds of family. And as the sun set on another day in the city that had seen their love story unfold, Sophia and Jackson knew that this was just the beginning. Their tale would be told for generations to come, a testament to the power of love to overcome all obstacles, bridge all divides, and write the most unexpected and beautiful of happily ever afters.